Yes, and I just felt so betrayed. I'm like, this is wild. This is like, this is legalized corruption, right? Because in a sense, you've got these interest groups, and they're always going to pay for these, influencing of the politicians, right? And
so I sense that Chris is getting antsy over here. Should we let him jump in? Because I feel like there's something you want to say.
He is. He's really like he's itching over there.
No, I think we're at,
I see his foot is moving. Right.
We got a mic set up for you. So just like, come on over.
Come on over, and then when we're done with you, we'll send you back.
So Hang mentioned that you guys met in the Marines. We don't have to do the whole. I don't want to go back to the whole story of that. And obviously, I think you're probably still too far. You need a little.
How am I, Trevor?
There you go.
Am I good?
Yeah. Hopefully good. So, all right. So, anything like right at the top of your head that you want to say?
Yeah. Look,
I can feel it from what coming from the.
That's funny. You can feel it because I'm a libertarian. Let me state for the record.
Yeah.
I think the government will
screw everything
a wet
up.
dream.
Right? Yeah.
And but also, kind-hearted, bleeding-hearted liberals will screw up something that's with good intentions rather.
Yeah.
So. People talk about freedom, right? And what's a human right. And I personally think that, when you listen to Hang's story and her family's story and many immigrant story, regardless of their origin, that freedom of movement is a human right.
Yeah.
Healthcare is not a human right.
Yeah.
Healthcare requires that you take a doctor and say, hey, and you're now required to do something.
Yeah.
So to give one person a human right requires to take somebody else's freedoms away, right?
Right.
So to me, healthcare is not a human right, but freedom of movement is a human right.
She doesn't agree.
Look, first of all,
wait, let me finish. Freedom of movement is a human right.
Yeah.
If I can swim or walk or run across a border, as long as I'm not going onto private property.
Right.
I should be able to walk there, or swim there, or run there, whatever, fly there.
Yeah.
But that does not mean once I get there that I'm entitled to free stuff. And I think that's one thing y'all failed to mention.
Distinction. That is a distinction, right? Yeah.
So when you get here, I think people should be allowed to come here and stake their own way, set up a lawn care business or painting business or whatever business.
And there's going to be hardships, right?
And there will be challenges. Mm-hmm. But when you get here, you are not entitled to any free stuff. No free living, no free healthcare, no nothing, whatever. Now, the reason that the immigration system is so messed up is because of the welfare state. It has nothing to do with immigrants coming and racism and people are racist and whatever. It has to do with our holistic tax system and everything, because there's so many things that people expect when they get here, and that we give as part of the system. Right now, if you
kind
get
of a
here,
recent development,
you get
right?
free. I mean, maybe in the last 20 years.
Fairly recent. Yeah.
So I personally would want the freedom. And I try to, there's this thing called the Stanislavski method. All right. So for your intellectual viewers out there, the guy who created what modern day empathy is all about, when you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, is this psychologist called Stanislavski. But so I try to put myself if American had a despot dictator in power, I'd want to flee with my family. Or fight, right? But if I felt like fighting for our freedom, for a revolution, wasn't sustainable or winnable, I'd want to take my 2 young kids who aren't old enough to shoot a gun yet. I'd want to get on a boat and go somewhere better.
Yeah.
And when I got to those shores, I wouldn't want anything except the freedom to go try to rent an apartment or even live on the streets, right? And wash windows or whatever I had to do to make a living. So I try to put myself in their shoes, but I also wouldn't want anything in return from the government. You don't owe me anything because I fled my own country to come to yours. You don't owe me anything, just let me be.
How do you know that's their perspective? Do you really feel like they are feeling entitled, or do they feel like they're just escaping
but
their
I'm not generalizing
wartime,
now. You
torn
are.
countries, right?
I'm not generalizing. I'm saying I don't know what their I don't know what their perspective is. I'm saying what our policy perspective should be is like, hey, come one, come all, no free shit. That's what I'm saying.
And it's okay, right? I think I'm not in disagreement about that, right? I want people to feel like they've got to go through and do the right things, just like anybody else does, right? Going through, and if you feel like you really need benefits, at least for the initial moments of trying to settle in and figuring out your way, like. I mean, this happens, right? We were on food stamps, right?
And we were.
But you applied for them, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a program to apply for it,
right?
But you shouldn't automatically, because you crossed the border,
and I don't know,
be entitled to anything.
I don't know if people
Except
are
the right to
assuming
live.
that necessarily, right? They just.
I think there's So there's like two different kinds of free shit, right? So there's like, hey, like I just got here. And I'm freezing cold and hungry. I could really use like a blanket and some food.
That's right. That's right.
That's good. But the whole like
put me up in housing
free
and
shit,
like
as a way
right.
of
Well,
life
I mean, you're right. I definitely don't agree with how some of these hotel, like in Manhattan, for instance, the mayor was putting homeless people into like blocks of hotel rooms.
Yeah.
And stuff like that, right? Which I heard about, and I was just like,
"That's
crazy."
Yeah.
Look, I mean, that's kind of crazy, right? Like, I in the end, like the problem is that you say that healthcare is not a right, but
it's not.
The thing is,
who's going to provide it then?
Okay, so
you have to force people to go to medical school.
I'm talking about
so that they can provide other people their human right.
But wait a second.
How do you argue with that? Come on, Hang.
I want to know. All right, if we're not talking about immigrants, all right, then what about healthcare as a right for people in the United States?
I still don't agree. It's not my.
What the heck can people do if they are not healthy?
I know
if their most basic
your mother-in-law's
needs
a doctor,
are not
right?
being met.
Your mother-in-law's a doctor, right?
Yeah.
How did she become a doctor?
She had to go through school, and she
paid herself to go through school.
Look,
and now because healthcare is a human right, the government's going to force your mother-in-law to provide somebody else.
Force her anything.
No, you're saying if it's a human right, it should be mandatory provided for somebody.
Look, the thing that we're talking about here, though, is my problem is that there's such a gap between insurance coverage and like doctors and just how people are. I think
you mentioned the problem is insurance, in my opinion. But that's like a 2-hour conversation.
So
for
part
sure.
of this is self-inflicted, right? As a society, because in cases like this, where my brain always goes, is I always think, what did people do before we had all this bullshit, right? So, or let's say the people that lived on this continent before everybody else arrived, right? Like
the real Americans.
And usually, when I try to think about like what's a human right, I think about if you talk about what's a basic human right, I always think, and this may be right or wrong, but I think about like if you stripped away everything we've built up as a system and we all just lived in some
as
sort
humans.
Of right, like
a land, right? Like a free for all.
Breathing's a human right.
And what would we feel like are our rights? Like movement, right? Like if this is my space, it's sort of like my right to not have you come and take it away from me. Yeah. But we created a lot of complexity in our society.
Correct.
And
conveniences, right?
And now it's like, well, you can't just so Native Americans found ways to stay healthy and not die. Europeans in the Middle Ages didn't do as well with that, right? Mm-hmm. But like people. But now we've created all this, and so now we got to figure out like how do you make it fair for everybody. And I get your point though, which is, some people figure out how to get there and how to get what they need, and some people don't. And so then the question is why? So the people who don't, people who like can't get it together or don't have the ability to pay for healthcare, or the ability to pay for whatever, whose fault is that? Is it their fault?
Look, I think where people mistake me and even Hang right now is they think that I'm not compassionate and think that as a human I shouldn't voluntarily extend, as a good human being, I should voluntarily extend some compassion to another human and give them something that maybe they're not entitled to. But to say you're entitled to something versus should another human being give it to you out of compassion are two different things.
Well, that comes to that comes to the point of the origin of where should it come from.
Right.
So, and your point about the government.
And I just don't think that people are entitled to health care.
Look, in summary, all right, okay, because I want to wrap this up real quick.
We're not in a hurry.
Chris, I mean, yes, to your point, healthcare is not a right? But I know that, again, coming from, my background, my parents didn't speak any English. We had a good system that, and neighbors and people that were
voluntarily gave it to
yes,
us.
I was going to say, I want to point out, that was what you said. The people that helped you came from the churches.
Right.
And came from your neighbors.
Neighbors.
Right.
And your ethnic group that said, hey, we want to help our peeps out, right?
Yeah.
Correct, right? And look.
It's always more effective.
It is, right? Again, going back to the grassroots and just the people that are on the ground doing real shit, right? So, the thing that I see now, though, is just that it's hard to really put anything to saying, your immigrants now are going to be okay, all right? They took the risk. They came here, and yes, by and large, they're doing what they need to do. But if they need healthcare and they can't pay for it because our doctors, the first thing you do, you call them and I'd like to make an appointment. Oh, what's your insurance? I mean, what is the way that they can navigate through that, right? Like this is the bigger question.
I'm not saying
how to do it.
And
we can't answer that.
Again, I'm not saying that's not a problem.
We can't
It's
answer
a
that.
humanitarian problem. I'm just saying when we talk about the American dream and the theme of the podcast, I think that if it's a human question, if I have the means to help my fellow man, I feel like I should.
Yeah.
That's a different topic.
Yeah.
But does it mean that the government of America should be held to a higher standard? A lot of people like this to compare us. A lot of people like to compare us to Scandinavia, which I laugh every time I see it because it's 98% white. Their immigration policies, policies are so draconian. It's like you have to have $1 million in savings, a PhD, and be Caucasian.
I get it, right? But I mean, going back to, again, right? Like, I'm not expecting, our government to be the cure-all and the ones to answer the problem.
Well, I'm glad,
right?
They'll mess it up.
I'm not, right? But I know that there's just different. There's different ways to solve this problem. But at the end of the day, you're saying, fine, if it's not a human right, to just be healthy and, be able to go to see a doctor without having to pay a crazy ass copay because, your insurance is, look.
I think, so there's a little distinction there. Healthcare, if you say it's a right for everybody to have healthcare, if the definition of healthcare is some sort of insurance program that pays for things that I need so I can go see the doctor. That's the system that we've created that is now problematic.
Yeah.
But if you think of healthcare, if you kind of switch it a little bit and you say, but everybody kind of has the right to be able to have a reasonable means of getting medical attention and staying healthy.
Which they do in a life-saving environment, right?
And
Here,
they do.
you can go to the hospital and not have to pay for it.
Right.
If your life is in danger.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, you can go to the emergency room, and check yourself in. And
you
if
might
your finger
get
is
some
broken,
debt on your if you write your social security number down on the intake form, you might end up with some debt you didn't realize.
Yeah. But unless you borrow the social security number from somebody else, but
that happens
but
too.
This thing about this thing that you said, because I keyed in when I didn't interrupt you earlier when you were talking, which is unusual for me, but you said we got here and people helped us, people from the church helped us, people from the. If you rewind in this country back, you don't have to go back that far before before you start to see a society that didn't really expect the government to do everything for them.
Yeah.
They were much more inclined to because you can say it's not, so certain things may not be a basic human right, but it's a basic human obligation, like you said, to kind of help the people around you, and to, that's why,
and you keyed in correctly. This is exactly my perspective, right? Like, maybe, Chris likes to say that I'm a liberal, and I sat next to a Republican the whole time in my MBA class, and he was always calling me a liberal. But I do have some just embedded values from where I came, right? And it doesn't necessarily involve the government, right? But I do want to see that people, if they do need their basic health checkups and things like that, as a what do you call it? Premeditated kind of examination, and just to make sure that they're okay. I think they should be able to do that without having to.
And we have, and you have to admit, we have created a system where it's damn near impossible.
So this is, yes,
or not impossible, but it's,
look,
it's really complicated.
If you remember what I said,
I think this is another. This is definitely another different topic.
It's a holistic problem that we have.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody says, in America, should we be able to, with our resources and our wealth and our intellect as an advanced society, first world society, create a system where everybody can access healthcare affordably? My answer is yes. But when people say you're entitled to, or it's a human right, that's where it rubs me the wrong way, because it's not.
Yeah.
Should we go to the drawing board and figure out how to create something that everybody can come to the table?
Yeah.
Yes.
We suck at that, though. That's the problem. Yeah.
No, we do.
Why do we suck at that?
But everybody does. I mean, look at the whole world.
No.
And when you think about America, we get held to a higher standard than all of Western Europe. But we are by far the youngest country in the youngest first world country in the world. So France hasn't figured it out. England hasn't figured it out. Nobody's figured it out. And they say, "Oh, I see where you rolled your eyes." It's like your free healthcare in England. Your free healthcare. It sucks.
I know nobody likes more taxation, but I went to visit my cousin who lives in Norway. And he had the chance to come live in the U.S. for some time.
It's like the one Vietnamese guy in Norway.
Well, there's more than one
Scandinavia. I just brought it up.
I've been in Norway.
Look, but I'm trying to be more specific, right?
No, okay,
because
yes,
the details that we're talking about here,
Right.
He told me, I lived in Texas and I got to see how crazy the work schedules are there, and you're not even.
But you can't immigrate there, Hang. So we were talking about immigration, right?
Correct.
And I'm not trying to be adversarial here, but it's like, if you want Norway's healthcare system, then you can't have. We also need Norway's immigration system.
Look, they are very, they are very particular
there
on who it is, and the handpick, right?
It's 98% white, and I'm not saying it's white is better, but I'm just saying I want to make that clear. But people are tribal, and so when you introduce, we have this melting pot here where everybody, black, white, Mexican, Asian, whatever. Norway doesn't have that. So they don't have to deal with cultural sensitivities. It's 98% white Christian American there. And maybe you've witnessed one neighborhood in their biggest city there, but it is all of Scandinavia is predominantly white Protestant society with blonde hair, blue-eyed, tall people there. And so their immigration system is like, hey, and I wasn't exaggerating. You have to have advanced college degrees. You have to have money in the bank. You have to know how to fill out the paperwork. There's no border crossing crisis there.
I like that you pointed out because just because you have an advanced college degree doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to fill out the paperwork.
Right. And I'm just saying, it's like, when people talk about Scandinavia with such awe, it's like you can't have Scandinavia's healthcare system with our immigration system.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. It won't
Or
work.
even just
Look.
with the number of people, right? So Norway has 5 million people.
Yeah, Texas is bigger than Norway.
Houston.
It is.
But you
It
started,
is.
but you didn't get to say you didn't get to finish the story about your friend in Norway.
sorry.
Or
I
your
mean,
cousin, your
no.
cousin.
I mean, in
I'm
the
rude.
end, look, you're right, and these are all
Mansplaining.
valid points, right?
Yeah.
Because whenever I was there visiting the beautiful, pristine, mountains and the countryside, it was definitely. Yes, everybody was white. It's
freezing cold.
right? And they, it's not as much of a melting pot here. But for sure, with my cousin and his experience and just saying like,
likes it.
hey, he loves it. He loves it for, the essence of raising a family. And just like, he's got other Vietnamese people that are there with him. He's not just the only one, right? So there are other people
There's like
there.
4 more in the whole country, and they all hang out
Okay,
here.
all right. All right. But look, my point, and you're right, to that point, I mean,
Yeah.
it's some things are just
Yeah.
not scalable. And Norway has a lot lot of resources too,
So I have been of the mind for quite some time that, and this actually gets to a different topic, which, and I don't know if I can officially declare myself a libertarian, but I definitely have libertarian tendencies. Mostly because I grew up I don't know if I might have said this when we were talking before, but I don't know if it was the time period or geographically like where I was, but when I was a kid growing up, there seemed to be this general like feeling among all of the grown-ups that the government has no idea what it's doing 99% of the time. Like, if the government gets involved, then it's just going to be fucked. And so that was just kind of everybody's, and of course the millennials
And
come
you
along
grew
and
up in New Jersey,
right? So
Yeah.
I don't know if that was,
Wow.
I don't know. And so I'm sort of predisposed to thinking, well, the government, like anytime the government wants to spend more money or do something new, my first reaction is always no, because you're already not doing a good job with everything that you're already doing. But that said, what was I going to say? It gets to this point of scale, which is is the original. Again, if you rewind in the U.S., the original vision was that the national government was much smaller in its in terms of what it did, and the states were much more kind of the prevailing organizational structure,
do what they wanted.
which is more like
Yeah.
Europe, right? If you look at all the European countries, they're all like more like our states. And so I wonder if we, and over the years, especially in the last 60, 70 years, the national government has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. In fact, if you go down the street, I bet you $10, you walk down the street, you stop any person and you ask them a question about the government without specifying what you mean, they will assume you mean the federal government, because that's what everybody thinks of as the government. And if we pulled it back, which is impossible to do now, but just as long as we're dreaming,
It is the American dream.
would it and I'd like
Dream.
a pony. Could we solve these problems better at the state and local level, because the scale problem isn't there, and you're not trying to solve a problem for 400 million, for one organism of 400 million people.
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think
I
a
agree.
big liberal politician who they love is Tip O'Neill, right? In Massachusetts, and Tip O'Neill's famous for saying that all politics are local, and you absolutely can fix things at the local level better than you can at the federal level. I mean, it hands down. Like
But we keep kicking everything up
our
and
problems
giving everything
in
right.
Houston are unique to problems in New York or LA, or like they have the wildfires out in the West Coast. We have a lot of flooding and hurricanes here. New York has just too much population and craziness, right? So
Yeah.
we're better equipped here to know how to handle our problems. And I think trying to handle it locally is where you should start for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I wonder, like education, right? Like how did we get to a point where the national government is like handling education matters like that? Like it's just this. I think it's just indicative of the fact that over the years, more and more has got pushed up to that level, and we don't have as much. If we did stuff more, locally, then it might be more solvable.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely will echo that point because, again, it goes back to local, right? I mean, being in Houston, you're going to have different problems than what you have in North Dakota or,
Or
Bismarck.
even if you have the same problems, it's easier to solve them for smaller groups of people.
I want to give Hang some street cred for the Houstonians watching.
Yeah.
Can you say where you went to high school in Houston, Hang?
Klein Forest.
But, and I guess what famous neighborhood in Houston did you live like literally a stone's throw away from? Inwood, which is Acres Homes, right?
Acres Homes, right in the 4-4, right?
Yeah, so Hang's got some street cred in Houston.
Yeah.
She grew up a little tough,
So I graduated from Klein, which is right, and I remember when the entire Klein school district was high school was Klein High School and Klein Forest, even before they built Klein
and there was Klein Oak, yes.
I remember when they built Klein Oak.
Oh, wow.
In fact, when I was in high school, I had a girlfriend who was in the very first class. So that's how far I go back.
Wow.
But,
So Klein High School for you, huh?
Yeah. That's what
Wow. See, we were in the KISD together, right?
Yeah. It was different times.
Yeah.
Now, back then, so another interesting point, kind of on the immigration thing, and I don't know how long we've been going, so...
55 minutes.
Trev, you just gotta
Trevor,
throw something at us when we need to shut up. But is he throwing something at us now? Oh,
4 minutes. Trevor's got the angry finger. 8 seconds. Sorry.
So 8, 10.
Wait,
60.
60 minutes.
I don't understand what that
is.
means.
The green the minutes? Yes.
So we're at.
This
60
means
minutes.
yes. This means no.
We're at 60 minutes.
So saving the dream, that's what we do, right?
Yeah, we're saving the dream over here. What was I saying? The high school.
I guess we gotta wrap it up.
In 1984, when Hang
was coming over here and you were graduating.
I graduated from high school.
Oh.
Now I was very smart. I was only 11 years old at the time, but I was one of those prodigies. No, I was full age. And my family moved to Texas.
From New Jersey?
From New Jersey in 82.
Wow.
Dirty Jersey.
And in 82. Actually, where I grew up, it was really out kind of in the country. Like, New Jersey is the Garden State. I'm surprised you don't know that.
Western New Jersey.
Yeah. Northwest, yeah.
Yeah.
And so when I got here, Houston was a very different place. And even, when your family got here.
Nobody went downtown, right?
No, you didn't go downtown.
No.
And out in the suburbs, so this was a time when there were bumper stickers that said, "Welcome to Texas, now go home." And shit you not, bumper stickers. Now. And everybody I went to Klein High School at the time. There, I don't know, there's 4,000 kids in the school or something like that. There was like the one black kid, the one Mexican kid, and everybody else was again with the phone. I have it on silent. I don't know why it's ringing. And I'm talking about like the belt buckles and I'm not saying this. So I don't say this.
I've seen all that too.
I don't say this to say that it's bad. This was the culture at the time. The big belt, like it was like a dessert plate on your belt, right? And the belt, like with the name stamped on the back of it.
I know it. I saw it.
Because when you get drunk in the morning.
I mean, we were doing the Cotton Eye Joe.
Yeah.
In third grade, and we would curtsy home.
Yeah.
We would curtsy home. Like, I know how to do this dance from third, fourth grade.
I haven't really learned a curtsy yet, but I'm working. And
it's all right.
And Houston has become because of people. So it was not very diverse at the time.
It was not.
And
it wasn't.
And in fact, we think now that the Houston economy is built mostly around oil and gas. But let me tell you, when the oil market tanked in the 80s, like my parents, the house that they just bought lost like 30% of its value in 1 year. It was much more tied to it then. And now here we are, just 30 years later, and or whatever. No, it's more than that. 50, 40. What? I can't do it.
40 years.
40 years later.
Almost 40 years.
Almost 40 years. 82, right?
Way more
diversity.
and largely due to the oil and gas industry has brought people from all over the world. And that's a case of where, I think. There are some people that kind of bitch and moan because some of the billboards are in Spanish, but I feel like that gives me a chance to practice my Spanish a little bit. But but Houston's a much more interesting place now.
I think so, and I think it's to your point
I love
your
it.
and your
I
theme,
love that perspective.
your theme, and where I'll even push on Hang here and maybe some of her views is like she's an entrepreneur. And she's gone out. She's gone out and she's done so much for herself, which is why I have so much respect for her. She sold a business to me, by the way, which is another thing. But she's built and sold businesses on her own while working, while going to school, serving in the military, and that to me epitomizes the American dream. And in Houston, you see that a lot more with the grit we have here. And to your point about the oil and gas crashes, right? Like you brought in people from all over the world with all this intellect and skill.
Yeah.
And so when it crashed, what did they do? They didn't say, hey, you owe me a handout. They just went and created other businesses.
I knew he was going to bring it back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. But that is actually like if you strip away all of the like problems that we've created through whatever decisions we've made in our systems, like that is kind of the core. Like that's that American ingenuity, grit, resilience, determination. That is always kind of been the backbone of everything, and it comes back to we started talking about this early on, but then about like kids now,
the generations
versus
yes.
the generation now.
Yes.
Like we're losing that, I think.
So. Absolutely.
Not Hank's kids, not my kids.
Yeah.
Look, I say absolutely. I say absolutely because this is, again, I feel like sometimes you have to fabricate some sort of hardship, for your kids so that they can go through it, right? But, I mean, if the other parents aren't doing that and trying to instill this in their kids, then what happens? You've got a workforce that's just a bunch of people that are not, thinking about what their friends are doing on Instagram and stuff like that. And it's a lot of different social media influences and stuff like that. And people don't think for themselves as much anymore, right? Or they don't try to seek their own truth, right? Which I always find is so important because they're the sheep of, social media, and they succumb to some of these things that are thrown out there, right?
What about starting a summer camp for kids and you call it Hood Camp? You send them to the hood.
I like that.
I like that,
right? Make them do like
low
crawl through the really low crawl.
They got to get in one fist fight.
Through some like
they got to like pick up
take
some
an elbow,
poop.
right?
Well, the thing that I see missing the most. So it was probably about I want to say somewhere around. Not quite 10 years ago, maybe 2014, 2015, when I first started being the boss of this generation that we now refer to as the millennials, right? And this is not to say that all millennials were like this, but but it was the first time I had these people in their I would say kids, but that's because I'm old. Late 20s, early 30s at the time, who looked at me and were completely mystified by the concept that they had to earn, they had to perform to get the money that they wanted to make. Well, right now you're making this much money and you have this role, and you could have this role and make this much money, but you have to
do some stuff.
You don't just get it because and I'm not making this up because I actually had somebody. I had somebody in my office, and he was a smart kid. Went to Colorado School of Mines, geophysicist.
Great school.
He could hold his own against the old geezers that we went and talked to at the oil companies, but he just was beside himself because he was 26 or 27 years old. He knew that he was smart. He was brilliant. And he wanted to be given a leadership role because he had the intelligence and the potential to do that. And
he wanted to make, whatever, $200,000 a year.
Yeah.
And he was only making $80,000.
He wanted to be like in charge of shit. Right. And so
Yeah.
And so I tried to show him a path where like he could get there, and
Progression,
that was unacceptable to him. It was the first time I ever walked out of my own office, by the way, because he just had me so completely, he had me so completely, and I was just like, this conversation's over. I walked out and left him in my office, and over my shoulder, I hear him say, he goes, why are you walking out of me? My father does that. And I thought, I would like to have your dad's phone number because maybe he could help me understand how to deal with you.
Session.
We could hang out.
Good guy. You know, and I had somebody else during that same time period. She looked at me. She was a little older. She was probably 32. And she said, and again, this is 7-8 years ago. And she said, well, if this company is just going to be stuck is going to insist on a performance-based compensation approach, then I don't think I can work here. And at the time, I was like, I don't know what other kind of compensation there is, right? And so turns out there's you pay people for what their potential is, and you know. And so anyway, that's the point. Is I think there's a whole different. You contrast that mentality to the one. To the classic American like grit and determination, there's a big difference there. Huge difference.
And I mean, I definitely, you know, the interviews that I've been conducting with would-be employees for my yogurt shop, I always sit right next to Cinnabon, which is where it all started. That was my first job when I was 15, and I always tell them, you know, this is where I started, and now I'm back here, like, you know, I own this joint, right?
Yeah.
And it's like it's kind of come full circle, right?
Good, yeah.
And I'm like, hey, whatever it is, try to stick with it. Try to have that dedication to your employer.
Even though it sucks.
Even though it sucks. You know what? You have to wash dishes.
Important
so
point.
what? Do it.
Even though it sucks.
That is
It will build your own tolerance for what you can do. And then, you know, if it's washing dishes or mopping the floor, do it in the best of your ability, right? And then you can be applauded and you can go from there. But people don't believe in paying their dues anymore. And this is really like, it sucks because for people like us who've been in the workforce, we've been doing what we've had to do. It's just, it's really a sign of the times. They're kind of a bit ungrateful, and I hate to use the word entitled, but they are. You know, the mentality of it is completely different, right? And it
is.
You don't evolve and you don't grow from that kind of mentality.
I've got a libertarian membership card for you.
right there.
Look, you can see. Look, you can see that I'm not a bleeding heart liberal, or I think
we can see that.
I am definitely a independent for whatever is right. And let people live, right? Live and let live, for sure, right? But then also do the right thing according to your fellow man, right?
So amen. So
amen.
The question.
Thank you, Michael.
Amen.
Amen.
So
damn you.
The question that I would love to come back with both of you at some point, and like part 2 of this.
Part 2
is which we can't do now because I'm looking at the.
Yeah, we're 71 minutes in, dude.
People already.
Who's
They
still
fell
with
asleep
us?
at the wheel.
People already stopped
Who's
watching.
still with us? Come on, I'm coming back next week too. I live 6 minutes away.
Good. But this is the question. So it's real easy to rag on the youngsters for not, whatever. The question is, how did we produce this?
Part of it's our fault, right?
How as a country, as a society, don't start because we don't have time. But think about this come back next time when the Brain Trust discusses. But you think about that, like, okay, how did we do this? And there are
We didn't beat our kids enough.
I still use my shoe.
Sorry. Sorry, Michael.
Hey.
That's
I know you said don't get started.
in this part of the world. That's a chunk.
A chunk.
Chunk. So because it didn't happen in one generation, right? Or it didn't happen like in the last 20 years. It was a progressive thing, and somehow we got to this point. But anyway, you guys are great. Thanks
really?
For, aren't you glad that we talked to you doing this?
How many people are still listening?
None. But
Look,
we enjoyed the conversation,
we had a
right?
great time.
Hey, there's at least 3 people on this planet, maybe 4 if
Maybe
Trevor's
4.
listening.
Trevor might be listening. and he might not be
that
listening.
Trevor
benefited
is
from this
playing Angry
conversation. And so it's a net positive, right? It's +4.
All right,
Yeah.
so we're gonna wrap it up.
Yeah.
But Hang Pham.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
and,
you.
Chris, what's your last name? I can never remember.
Bentley.
So for some reason in my brain, your last name starts with an H.
You
And I
told me this. There was like a Chris Hendricks or something
I don't
that
know why.
you.
Hemsworth, Chris
Hems-
Hemsworth.
There you go. I look just like him. That's right.
It's all making sense now, Chris.
My heart's beating too fast right now. I'm just
All right.
kidding.
That's it.
All
Done.
right.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right.